the kind of the elephant in the room here is AI, right? It's some people will say, well, like that's been such a focus these last couple of years that maybe storytelling's taken a bit of a back seat, or maybe storytelling is outsourced. There's two reasons why I think storytelling is in its golden era. Primarily because you can't replicate the human experience using AI, right? And the more that people become skeptical about that, like this is a podcast, there's gonna be some ums and ahs. It's not perfect, but it's human, right? It's our human experience. And the more that people become skeptical about what they're seeing, the more the human experience is going to matter.
The great Mark Cuban once said, "Business happens over years and years. Value is measured in the total upside of a business relationship, not by how much you squeezed out in any one deal." And we couldn't agree more. This is the Business Development Podcast, based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and broadcasting to the world. You'll get expert business development advice, tips and experiences, and you'll hear interviews with business owners, CEOs, and business development reps. You'll get actionable advice on how to grow business. Brought to you by Capital Business Development, capitalbd.ca. Let's do it. Welcome to the Business Development Podcast. And now your expert host, Kelly Kennedy.
Hello! Welcome to episode 353 of the Business Development Podcast. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to bring you Simon Ostler. Simon is a public relations and media consultant, journalism instructor, and former newsroom leader with more than 20 years of experience in Canadian media. Over the course of his career, Simon held senior editorial roles, including managing editor and executive producer at Global News Toronto, where he helped lead coverage of some of the country's largest stories, guided news teams through breaking events, and made the daily decisions about what stories earned attention and which ones didn't. Today, Simon helps organizations earn trust, build credibility, and uncover the stories hiding in plain sight within their businesses. Drawing on decades of newsroom experience, he advises leaders on media strategy, reputation management, crisis communications, and storytelling that actually resonates. If you've ever wondered why some stories capture attention while others are ignored, why trust matters more than ever, and what separates credibility from promotion, you're about to find out. Because in the world where everybody has a platform, the organizations that win are the ones with stories worth believing. Simon, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here.
Hey, Kelly, great to join you. It's been a long time coming. I'm really excited to do this.
Oh, me too, man. Like, it has been. I feel like at this point, we've actually been talking about the show for well over a year.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that too when we first had our first discussion, and then just the way we connected there, I was like, oh, we got to make this happen. And here we are a year later.
Absolutely, man. It's so cool. Like I said, we don't typically get too many people from the newsroom background. I think at this point, we've had Carmen LaBelle, who actually introduced us. Exceptional individual, has become a friend over time, super helpful to everything that I've built, and actually really gave me my very first insights into what life was like in a newsroom.
Yeah, so Carmen is a former colleague of mine, and she's doing some incredible stuff post her journalism career. And I just it's great to talk about what I'm so passionate about and be able to take my years of journalism and always being aware of everything that's going on, and now being able to harness a lot of those skills and help individuals and organizations tell better stories.
And me and you both know, like, stories are everything. Actually, when we were first talking about this show, we were talking about, like, what should we talk about? And then it was like, I think we just need to talk a little bit about the power of storytelling and what that actually means in 2026. Because I think it's an area that we all know is important, but we don't always know how to tell that story.
No, and I think that storytelling is sometimes too broad of a term. We think about storytelling, it's an ancient form of communication and how we relate to each other as people. Journalism is a form of storytelling that It's important to help people know what's going on in the world, help people know and feel informed and make decisions. But ultimately, when it comes to how we disseminate information in journalism, it is through stories and finding the right characters to tell those stories. And the same is true for your business. The same is true. You need to find the stories. You need to find the characters within your organization who can help you unearth those great stories from that you have to tell.
Absolutely. And before we get into that today, I want to dig a little bit deeper into your journey in your career because you've had an absolutely exceptional one. I look at your resume and I just think like, wow, like how have you done so much in, 20 years? But before we get into that, Simon, who is Simon Ostler? How did you end up on the path that has led you to entrepreneurship today?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, journalism was my first love and my passion. And I graduated from a college here in Ontario called Fanshawe in London, my hometown. My dad moved out to Alberta, and I thought, you know what? Instead of going to Toronto where everyone else does for their internship, I can have a free place to stay, and B, I can test out a market that I don't know as well. So that led to my beginning of my journalism career after graduating, coming out to Edmonton and working at, and I know that a lot of your audience is familiar with the Edmonton market,
You
but
bet.
for those who aren't, 630 CHED is a radio
Yes.
station that's a juggernaut in Alberta. And that was my first job working for the legendary Bob Layton and
Wow.
being able to just do a newscast on the weekends and tell stories to Albertans. And that was the beginning of my career. I went through and ended up at Global in Edmonton as well and worked at CTV and ultimately headed up back home after 6 years. I came for a 2-month internship. But I was there for 6 years and I came back married to my wife, who
Yeah.
is also from Ontario, but grew up in Alberta. So that was the beginning of my career and so many of my roots. As you mentioned, Carmen, someone who I still keep in touch with. So many people from the Alberta community that have really been key to my career development. So ultimately, did come back to Toronto, that market I was trying to avoid off the top, and worked at some of the biggest newsrooms in the country. The fast-paced nature of the biggest market in the country, and worked my way up, as you mentioned in the intro, to being a managing editor. And for those who don't know the media structure, a managing editor is the person who is in charge of the reporters, in charge of saying, okay, this is what you're covering today, this is what you're
Yeah.
covering today. We work collaboratively in our newsroom meetings to decide what stories matter. Some days it's just so obvious what the story is. Other days
Sure.
it's not. Right? It's depends on what's going on. But the managing editor role, you're very much looking at, okay, well, this is what we need to cover. This is why it's important, and making sure it actually gets done. So on top of that is okay, how do we tell these stories? Who are the voices that we're going to get to tell these stories? And how do we make sure that we get it all done within the next 6 hours? And I say 6 hours because you need your scripts finalized and ready for air.
Wow.
Not 8 hours. The 8 hours, and the days can go longer than 8 hours often. But in my last year in that role, I switched to executive producer, which is a term I think everyone is familiar with from seeing on television. But the role in a newsroom as an executive producer is you're more in charge of lineup and flow, and
Yeah.
okay, what's the top story tonight? What are the packaged graphics that we're going to include? How are we going to position this so the viewers at home or those watching online can look at it and go, okay, this makes sense and it flows, and those are you have a team of producers that work under you. So that was my career. I worked on also in a position that was really key called an assignment editor. And an assignment editor, they answer the phones from the public. They deal with assigning the cameras or assigning the resources to make sure that as news is developing, that you have someone there and you don't miss out on it, and that I like to call it the air traffic control position in a newsroom.
Yeah.
And that is a very key role, and one that isn't necessarily as understood, but all those roles together really did help shape who I became and how I now show up on the other side of the fence.
Wow. Okay. I want to go deeper into the newsroom itself because I think you've gone pretty deep, but like, help me understand, how do you find all of those stories, get them recorded? Let's use our 8-hour timeline here. Dude, I produce, a podcast that's an entertainment storytelling show now called I Used to Work There. It's a ton of fun. And it still takes me like 8 hours to produce that show. How are you able to do the full news, while getting reporters to different parts of the country and manage to get all of that, not just lined up, but put together in a way that actually resonates with the public?
Every day is a sprint, and not every day. And it's also the week is a marathon, but the day is a sprint. You wake up and you have to have. Thankfully, in a major market and even in the smaller markets where they are still learning, you have reporters who are quite green right out of school. But in a major market, everyone just knows the position that they have, and that this is just how things go. So you wake up, you look at what's going on, you read the newspapers, you look at social media, and you're just, okay, what are the big stories that we need to cover today? And of course, you have to have that balance of that long-term planning. Like, you're looking at your calendar, what's coming up in the weeks and months ahead. And in the summertime, you're always looking, okay, how do we fill the same amount of time in the summer that we would when everything's in session and government's functioning, and some days there's a lot of news and some days there's not. So every day you have to have a firm plan, making that decision and coming up with a meeting, and so a news meeting at usually at 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and you give your marching orders. Does that plan that you come up with at 9 or 10 in the morning reflect what the final product is? Almost never. Because the news cycle continues to change. You get breaking news throughout the day. And then sometimes you have those stories, like I said, the ones that you plan in advance that you have to hold because of breaking news and resources. Because it is ultimately about resource management. So you have your kind of meat and potatoes that you need to have in the newscast every single day. Yeah. But like, for example, like a story that I think is very relevant to this audience is something like interest rates, right? You look at your interest rate. You don't know whether the interest rate's going up. You can have a pretty good idea, but you see that 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, that Bank of Canada governor comes out and says the interest rates are going up, or the real estate data comes out for that day. You don't know what the results are going to be, but you need to be prepared to tell that story. So how do you tell that story? What are the ingredients for a story like that? Well, first of all, you need an expert, right? You need an economist, from one of the big banks who can talk about what this means, or in the real estate numbers that come out, you want to speak to your local real estate association and get a sense of what's missing. And that is hearing from someone who is buying a house or someone who's buying groceries and they're feeling the impacts. And that is what I always said to challenge reporters is, how do you how do we tell this story? And the question is always, who is our character, right? Who's the person who's going to make people feel something when they hear, like, if they're looking to get a first-time home buyer? You need to find that person, and you need to find those characters, because those are the types of people that everyone can relate to. And so many times you have your expert voices who are extremely qualified, and you need those people in your stories to help tell this. But people will remember the relatability of that couple with the dog, and you get a picture of the dog, and they're trying to get into their first home, and they're struggling to do so. So it's finding those people. Oftentimes that's the hardest part of the job, because you can call the university professor for an expert clip, you can get the politician at City Hall, but that's what separates the good storytellers from the great ones. They're the ones that are able to find and talk to real people and integrate them into their stories in a way that says, I can relate with this topic because of the way it's told.
Oh, 100%. And what's really funny is that if you look at business development and building interest with companies, it's the same thing. You actually have to speak to them in terms and phrases and pitch them with products and images that they can actually relate to. Because if you start to send them a bunch of stuff that they have zero relation to, they can't connect. They don't connect, you ain't getting no meeting.
No, exactly.
So it's amazing how much proper storytelling and the way that you frame and deliver information to people is as relevant with news as it is in business.
Yeah, and I think that, getting back to your question about just how quickly you have to turn things around, I think that's what makes journalists, ex-journalists so good in the communication space is because that feeling in your mind never goes away that you have this arbitrary deadline that you need to, like, if I get on something, I need to be able to solve it that day. And which is an exceptional offering for someone who needs that storytelling within their organization. We can, we'll hunt it down with that mindset of we have to get it done by 4 or it's dead. They call it a deadline for a reason.
Yeah.
So we have that ability to look for those characters and look for those, and that was what made or broke a story in a newsroom. So it's you have to be able to do it quickly, and you also need to do it accurately. Right? That's very important, is the accuracy to maintain the credibility of a news organization. And the same thing goes to your brand, right? You want to tell stories that reflect your brand accurately and builds your credibility as opposed to eroding it.
Take me into your time choosing which stories aired and which ones were just getting passed over, right? I imagine that you were probably receiving a lot of information coming in from the public. Hey, I got this big event coming, or our company's launching a new product or whatever. And you have to decide what is newsworthy and what is just air, what is just garbage. Walk me through.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, and I'll walk you through that. Interestingly enough, like the PR pros, like the public relations professionals, people like what I'm doing, to journalists, I think there was a study, a 2021 study that was done, and it's somewhere in the lines of 7-1 in Canada.
Wow.
There's 7 PR pros to every journalist out there. So, and I felt that working in a newsroom, somehow my email got on everyone's on distribution list.
Yeah.
And you're constantly being pitched, right? Like, and that this pitch is going out to you and it's going out to every other newsroom in the country. So what you have to decide. You do have to decide what is worth your time, and also you have to be able to sniff out what is promotion for a product that is being wrapped up as an earned media opportunity. So it's like, okay, this new startup is launching and it's for $2.99 a month. You can get this new app and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, so why would we put that on the news? Like, what's the news value? What's in it for the consumer, other than the fact that we are giving your product? So that those product stories were really hard to break through. So it ultimately had to look at what's in the zeitgeist of what's happening in the world, and a lot of that is now shaped by our online discourse, for the better or the worse.
Yeah.
And you want to tap into that, and you also need those meat and potato stories, like your crime and your politics, and if it's an election year, like an extension of politics. But you need to make sure that you are telling the fundamental stories that are key to keeping your audience engaged, as well as those human interest stories that I would say are really the ones that people will remember at the end of the day. They might not remember that there's a new campaign to fix the potholes on your street. While that's again, that meat and potatoes, you will remember, the dying veteran who that people showed compassion for and allowed for him to go and say goodbye to his wife at home, or, those stories that just speak to our humanity.
Yeah.
And so those ones always, those weren't always what we call day turn, right? Because it's like, okay, is this a story we want to do? If you want to give it justice and you want to do it a little more, look at telling the story in a way that it has that emotional resonance. Sometimes you want to just take a step back and allow that reporter to have an extra day to write to it and make it just that much punchier. So every day, most of the stories that you get pitched, you can't do. And you have to make those determinations with resources. How do you make this newscast flow? How do you make sure that, and it is those stories that can't wait, you have to tell that day. And sometimes that ends up bumping the stories that otherwise you would be putting in that newscast that day. Does that answer your question?
I think so. What I want to go back on, though, is you talked about a term called earned media. And I want to chat about that particularly. What does earned media mean? Hey, rock stars, quick pause here. If you're anything like me, you've probably dreamed about owning your own business most of your life. The Revolution hybrid vacuum from Hypervac Technologies is a portable duct cleaning system that fits right in the back of your truck or van, giving you a real opportunity to launch your own duct cleaning business starting at under 7,000 Canadian dollars. Visit www.hypervac.com to learn more. Thanks, Hypervac. Let's get back to the show.
So earned media in the PR space, and it's funny how little I even knew about this working in journalism, right? We're not like, oh, we're picking up earned media. But earned media from the public relations standpoint is that you have a news release or a media pitch. So I write to say you took media pitches on this podcast. I would email you, hey Kelly, I have this great character, this great story wanted to tell you, and catering it to that organization and knowing what they actually would pick up. If you decided that, oh, I like this story that Simon's pitching me, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to publish it. That is an earned media impression.
Okay.
So you can pitch a lot. Like I said, I got pitched a lot as a managing editor, and most of those stories didn't end up on the air. So that's a pitch that doesn't land as an earned media pickup.
Okay.
And so when talking about earned media, that is where you pitch. You don't pay. You're not paying for this.
Sure.
The story has to stand on its own merit, and then it gets picked up on a news in either a print publication, a digital publication, or on television.
Okay, thank you so much, because I think that really does ultimately clear. It basically just means you were selected. You'd put in through, in business development, we would call it, we booked the meeting, right? So if we're doing all the work, we're obviously talking to a lot of different people. If they choose to say, yep, Kelly, we're interested, we'll book that meeting, it's kind of the same thing as earned media.
Exactly. Yes, it's very much you have been selected, and this is the story, and hence the earned.
Okay.
That you made it through. And trust me, for someone who does a lot of pitching, it's nice to get the earned. It's like getting the W in a professional sports league.
Yeah. Well, as somebody whose job was to book meetings, it's the same thing, man. It's like, it's a lot of effort to get to that earned. What's funny, though, is how similar, like I said, that ultimately is. And a funny thing, like you're talking about, receiving all of these pitches. I've had a lot of meetings, with supply chain managers of large scale organizations within Canada. And one of them actually became a good friend over time. And I remember we were sitting at lunch one day, and I was sitting across the table from him, and he worked for a large scale oil and gas company here in Alberta. And I just said, what is it like being on the other side, right? I know what it's like being on my side, being the guy pitching all of these opportunities and trying to get that meeting. What is it like for you? And it wasn't dissimilar from what you just said working in a newsroom, where he just said, Kelly, I get like 1,000 emails a week, man. Like, I just got to go through these, and, we might get to them, we might not. Almost all of our email at this point is being filtered by AI. We're pretty much not reading it, because what's the point unless you have to search for something? And so, it was very similar in that side where he was saying, like, a lot of the times I'm actually just so overwhelmed, I can't even really deal with the amount of stuff coming into my inbox.
And I totally feel that. There were so many times that I would put my head on the pillow at night and realize that I was halfway responding to someone, someone that I had a pre-existing relationship with that was pitching me a story that, was kind of on the fence of whether or not it would be something we would cover.
Yeah.
So you're in the process of sending that email, and then someone comes into my office and says, "There's a fire. We got to respond, and we got to deal with this, like literal fire that we have to respond to." And then you look at your drafts at the end of the year, and it's just like this land of half responded to emails.
Yeah.
And I think that was somewhat cathartic having, after I left journalism, being able to write on LinkedIn about my experiences from inside that space. Because you're talking about with your contact there, asking them what it's like. You do get so overwhelmed with emails and responses, and how much it matters to them. So you try and respond to the ones that you have those pre-existing relationships with, even if it's a hard maybe.
Yes.
But it got to the point for me that to avoid my own burnout, I'm not going to respond, because sometimes a response would signal to some people that you're saying there's a chance, right? Like there's still an opportunity for them to get the earned media. So sometimes the silent treatment, sadly, was the only way to make sure that they didn't continue to pollute your inbox and ultimately distract you from what you're trying to do.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes it's the kindest thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah. It didn't feel like that at the time, because, you always want to make sure that you're maintaining those relationships, and you never know when you're going to, because that's the other thing is, like, there's the inbound, but then there's the breaking news story where you need the expert voice and you need the help of that same person that you ignored. And are they
Yeah.
going to be as quick to respond to you when the tables are turned, when you all of a sudden need them? So,
Yeah.
even in this role, I'm always saying, okay, how do we help journalists, even if
Yeah.
it's not going to benefit me? Like sharing on LinkedIn, so a journalist that will often do a call out. They're looking for help from, looking for someone again, like who is renting, and they're looking, or whatever the story is that they're working on. They want to find someone who can be the example of that. And I think that's a great opportunity for any PR people who are listening. Is don't just wait for opportunities that are benefiting you, because that's some of the goodwill that you build up.
It's interesting on my side of things with the podcast, right? Because when we got started, we couldn't find people to interview, right? Like it's like this guy has no credibility. We don't know what this show's going to be. Like I often look at the first 20 or 30 guests on the show and just thank them. I still thank them to this day because we would have never gotten here had they not stepped up and put themselves on the line and said, I don't know what this is going to be, but I'm going to try it. But it's funny now that almost all of the guests for the BDP are actually recommendations, word of mouth recommendations from people and guests I've already had on the show. I probably receive 100 pitches a week from PR
Wow.
agencies trying to get on this show. But in my experience, what I've found is that the best guests tend to come from pre-existing relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's true with in communications, and that's again why like you see a lot of journalists who end up in PR because they do have those relationships, those pre-existing relationships. I was just working on a Father's Day event on the weekend, and dealing with I'm trying to call the newsroom that to see if they're coming out, so I can tell my client, hey, this it's one of those events that is very timely, and I'm not able to get that response. So I'm like, oh, actually, I'm watching the newscast. It's one of those 24-hour newscasts, and I see the anchor. I'm like, oh, I know him on Instagram.
Yeah.
So I just DM'd him on Instagram and said, hey, are you guys coming out to our event today? And he's like, oh, this reporter should be there soon. I was like, oh, wow, you're actually on the air right now and responding to me on Instagram. And you don't get that.
Wow.
That was through building up the reputation that I've built over my 20-year career. They don't respond to every PR person who gets back to them. So
Yeah.
it is like, oh, and also I say, like, what if they do pick up the story that I'm interested in? I say, thanks for trusting me. Thanks for trusting my and it does really scratch the itch that I would used to crave every day, from that that adrenaline push every day, working on a newscast and creating something out of nothing when you wake up to when you end your day.
Yeah.
So being an experienced media leader and having spent all the time, they understand that I've been in the trenches with them. And I do think that does give my pitches more consideration.
Oh, 100%. Because not only do they have that, mutual respect for you, but you know exactly what to say because you know what they're looking for, right? You know what it's like to be on that other side.
Yeah, and I think that the great thing about being in this, being like not being in the journalism space but being adjacent, is there's an outlet for me to still do something with that energy that I used to wake up with. Right? It's like, okay, now it's just a bit of a different approach, and my bosses are the clients that I serve, right? Not the news outlets that I used to work for, but it's the principles are very similar. And that we look for great stories to tell, and like that's where I really have enjoyed. I've kind of really focused in on organizations that have storytelling at their core. Particularly, hospital foundations is one space that I've kind of started becoming my area of expertise. And why hospital foundations? Their goals are simple, right? Their goals are to fundraise and to promote the hospitals that they represent. So how do you do that? You do that through telling the stories, and the successful stories that come from your clients, who are patients, right? So when someone has a great outcome, they want to share that with the public. They want to talk about how their life has been extended through, and that just carries such emotional resonance. Way more so than no disrespect to the CEO or the C-suite,
Yeah.
But those stories of someone saying, this treatment allows me to hold my newborn baby and to see my child graduate from college,
Yeah.
right? Otherwise, it's literally a matter of life and death. And that connects with, because we've all, whether it's cancer or some other illness, we all can relate to the fear of our own mortality.
Yeah.
And and we're not paying these folks to tell their stories. They want to tell the stories because they are that passionate about it, and that makes them such strong brand ambassadors as well, because they literally know that this organization has resulted in an extension of their life, and that a lot of people end up in worse situations because they don't, whether it's early prevention or, and they want to they're very focused. And I find that they've been fantastic
Yeah.
brand ambassadors and fantastic speakers on behalf of these organizations. And we'll often put them up without a spokesperson or a CEO. They'll just go and
Yes.
and it's beautiful to watch because the news organizations love it because it's real people telling real stories.
Yeah.
And the organizations benefit from it because what does it do? It encourages people to make those decisions, what they do with their donor dollars, and hopefully end up supporting one of these causes.
What's really interesting about that, and I want to circle back on what you just said, it's actually not about the foundation. It's actually not even about the hospital. It's about the experience of the patient. The story has nothing to do with the corporation per se. It ties, but the story isn't the corporation. The story is a human.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love about working with the organizations I have been lucky enough to work with, is that they understand that is the approach, and they don't push back saying, well, for a 5-minute interview, we really would like our, CEO or our vice president of communications to come on and share some bullet point facts. I'm like, well, the bullet point facts, if you give a journalist that on a piece of paper, they will read it. That'll be part of the introduction. And because if you start getting into a story that is really, is very emotionally resonant, can make people feel something, in this case, feel like a sense of their own mortality or feel a sense of happiness for this person's outcome. And that is, you don't want to interrupt that with a talking head, so to speak, as we called it in the newsroom, that doesn't necessarily connect. And I'm not saying by any means that the C-suite don't have those stories to tell. I think that's why it's more important for them to get media trained to be able to unearth that kind of content as well.
Well, I think you can keep going back to numbers. You can keep going back to what happened. But when they're talking about the corporation, it's usually not about an individual story, right? And so I think a lot of the problem is, especially you see it all over LinkedIn, people are talking about these big wins the company's had, windfall profits or whatever else. But they're
so excited about it too,
They're
Kelly.
not relatable,
They're
right?
They're thrilled and they're excited about the profitable outcomes, right?
That's right. Oh, super. They are. No one else is.
And that's again where I say thrilled or excited, because if you look at how many times that's the language that is used in corporate speak, that immediately it means nothing to the outsider, right? You're focusing so internal, and surely you are excited. I'm not questioning whether they're actually excited, but if everyone's excited about their latest release or their newest hire, it doesn't land in the same way. That it becomes white noise, especially in the social media landscape where your thumb is making the decisions before you onto the next one. You're not connecting. So it's really important to find to tell stories of people who are a little deeper than that, and you can hook them. Whether it's on video, whether it's an op-ed or whatever the format may be. And this isn't just a formula for what we mentioned earlier about earned media. Because, there are, as I said, the 7-to-1 ratio, the odds of you getting that earned media are slim. So you need to have a backup plan.
Bring me into how a company humanizes itself, right? One of the things that I kind of made a pitch for earlier this year was that you need advocates. You need people out there advocating on your behalf, talking about your company. And the reason I made that pitch was, of course, you want your company to succeed. Of course, you think your products and services are better than the competition, right? But you stand to get all of the reward for that as the CEO, the executive, the business owner. You're kind of the worst person to be pitching your products and services, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think this really gets back to a lot of organizations, especially in the C-suite, and understandably, especially if they're publicly traded, they're all about reputation management, right? Like, how do we maintain and grow our reputation? And I think obviously that's important, and there are a lot of high-paying crisis communication firms for that very reason.
Yes.
But I think the one thing that I've noticed is where there's a gap in is building up the goodwill bank. And building up the goodwill bank is not in being prepared with statements and how you will respond if there is the inevitable crisis. That's an important part of the communications process. But what is missing a lot of the times in organizations is the other part, which is how do we tell positive stories? How do we fortify ourselves and build up that goodwill bank for that inevitable bad story? That our brand already has that positive reputation.
Yeah.
So I would argue that and I have argued this in the LinkedIn posts, that the idea of fortifying your business and telling the stories that matter and telling the stories that land and have those emotional resonance and reaching an audience is equally as important as preparing for the inevitable storms that will come your way. And that's why it's important to hire someone who has that journalist background to go, because you become a little blind to your own, as you're mentioning, right? And at the top, you're looking at you might not realize that there's a incredible story of one of your staff members who maybe you either have heard the story or they don't believe it's a good story. You need that independent or outside validation saying that is the story we need to tell. And then on top of that, you want to make sure you're not putting in, if you identify that employee who has been there for 30 years and they met their spouse at that institution, and they're going to have there's some sort of uniqueness to their story that ties back to your brand, and not always even directly ties back. How do we extract that story? And I wouldn't say it's an exploitation of that story. That story is there, and everyone's proud of that internally.
It's a true story.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key here is and same with journalism, right? You have to tell stories that are actually happening and not bend the truth. You want to be able to extract that story and tell it for not only your internal audience, like within the organization, but reaching those external audiences. And what's a way to do that? I mentioned earlier, what's your plan B? What's your plan B if you can't reach the 6:00 news or the newspaper? It's social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Social media. And a lot of these earned media channels or rather owned media channels, I should say, are if you have a Facebook or you have an Instagram page. And in Canada, you're going to reach people who otherwise won't see that content because the earned media is likely blocked. And that's a conversation for another day. But if you go to any of these news websites, you can't access them on social media. So that presents a unique opportunity to make sure that you're telling these stories both internally and externally using your own media channels. And what will happen potentially then? You will get a call from a news organization saying, hey, someone shared me this video that's picked up a lot of clicks and it's being shared a lot on social media. We'd love to interview the hypothetical couple there that has been married for 30 years and are having renewing their vows at the office.
Yeah.
Or something, whatever the story may be. So sometimes that's the alternative is let's get the story out there and see if there's interest in picking it up. And if it doesn't get picked up by the mainstream media, you are still able to share it and have it on those owned media channels, like on your Instagram page, on your TikTok, if your corporation has a TikTok. And even, sometimes you end up just posting it to to your own channel and it ends up still getting a lot of attention and it's positive press for the organization.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's kind of counter to what I think a lot of corporations are thinking right now, right? They're thinking, we have this great new widget, this great new technology. We're going to do a big blast and talk about how awesome it's going to be and all these tech specs. And you're like, why don't we talk about the impact that product has had on somebody's lives and maybe not even talk about the product itself?
Exactly. And I think it is a win if you can get pickup in coverage, even if it's a mention of the organization and
Yes.
it's adjacent to your organization getting positive coverage. Because you can't control, particularly in the media space, you can't control what they actually end up saying about your organization, and that's
Sure.
another reason why there's fear of putting your brand out there. The kind of the elephant in the room here is AI, right? Some people will say, well, like that's been such a focus these last couple of years
Yeah.
that maybe storytelling's taken a bit of a back seat, or maybe storytelling is outsourced. But there's two reasons why I think storytelling is in its golden era. Primarily because you can't replicate the human experience using
Yeah.
AI, right?
Yeah.
And the more that people become skeptical about this is a podcast, there's gonna be some ums and ahs. It's not perfect, but it's human, right? It's
Yes.
our human experience. And the more that people become skeptical about what they're seeing, the more the human experience is going to matter. And I think that no better way to do that than through storytelling.
Yes.
And secondly, the robots are listening, right? They are scouring this podcast.
They
They are
are.
looking for keywords, and they are doing that. So when someone types in, "What's the best business podcast for me to listen to?" on ChatGPT or Claude, it's going to be scouring this podcast now, and increasingly, especially as you get more popular, it's going to start looking for evidence. And a
Yeah.
lot of disproportionately, the evidence that AI uses is through earned media because it's independent
course.
and verified.
Yeah.
And when you have so much AI slop, as it's often called, the authentic storytelling in these lanes, even if newsrooms are struggling and newsrooms are getting smaller,
Yeah.
they carry even more value to organizations. So that's another reason. And so I don't know anyone who watches the 6 o'clock news, or I don't remember the last time I listened to the radio in my car. There still is value in that, it to be getting out to that audience and for it to be recommended and for your brand to be positively identified and positively reflected
Yeah.
in the zeitgeist, whether it's in the digital space or in the artificial intelligence space.
What I can tell you is this, even in podcasting, everybody's looking for that third party validation. And in my opinion, regardless of what you think about the news is still probably the most credible third party validation you can get for almost anything you're working on, corporate, podcasting, you name it.
Yeah, and I mean, without getting partisan in here, like you see politicians who sometimes see stories that they don't like and they call out organizations, but then you see their campaign content, and what are they using in that? They're using news articles to make their points, right? Because they see
Absolutely.
that value as well. I would absolutely agree with you there that they are that third party validation in the public discourse, and that's again why it's important because you might get a news story that is not going to be great for your brand credibility.
Yeah.
But if you're fortifying your business and you're thinking about telling those stories for many years leading up to that, then it's not going to have a catastrophic effect, or it won't likely, depending on what it actually is. It will somewhat dampen that impact to your overall brand credibility because people already know what you represent, and it's one bad news story or one situation is not likely going to change how they feel about your brand overall.
But it kind of sounds like you need to have some level of track record, right? Because on the other hand, you could have one really bad story and nothing else out there, and now your whole brand is associated with that one negative story.
It's becomes your whole world, right? And to dig yourself out of that hole at that point, it may be, it's not, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but some cases it may be impossible to continue with that brand if it's that tarnished. And that goes the same for your personal brand, right?
Yes.
I talk to a lot of executives and they want to get into the thought leadership space and just be able to attract, and people who work in certain organizations, they want to make sure that they're known for their individual contributions as well. And how do you do that? Well, you start posting on Instagram, you start maybe writing once a week on your LinkedIn, and it helps you to become better known for what you do. And that's exactly what I started doing after I left journalism. was, okay, I have these platforms that I've built up through my time as a journalist, but the organizations that I represented, they don't own those. I own them, right? And now I can pivot that and create content that will resonate with my intended audience.
Yeah.
And then build up. And, like that's, I've met so many great people, including the many of the clients I have now, is because they feel like they got to know me. Because I put that blend of not just business speak, but also showed some of my own personality, showed pictures of my dog, whatever I'm comfortable with, talk about some things in my personal life as well. And
Absolutely.
I think that's true for, as we talk about humanizing our brand, it's important that we do it for ourselves as well, as much as we're comfortable sharing and building up that understanding of, the CEO is more than just a guy in a suit who
That's right.
does quarterly calls and represents the shareholders, but is an actual human who people like and they can trust.
Absolutely. And let's talk about trust, right? How important is trust in 2026 and beyond?
I would argue, and from my position, it's what I'm kind of leaning on for my business. But I would say that trust is at an all-time high as a metric of and a currency, because it's easy to replicate what people are very skeptical. As I mentioned earlier, people are very skeptical about what they're seeing online. So the more that you can build up the trust in the good times, and we live in a world where everyone has a rating, right? Your Uber driver has a rating; they can rate you. Businesses have a rating. You have a bad experience, and you can give them a 1 star, and it hurts their overall business. And those are all metrics of trust, right?
Yes.
How much am I going to trust this organization? And when you're doing your own research, what do? You go and check to see if there's any reasons you shouldn't trust them.
Yeah.
So we're making those determinations all the time. So when it comes to brand storytelling, finding ways to always uphold your trust, and it's the kind of thing that it's like the day that you go to the gym for a year and you look really ripped, right? Everyone's talking about how ripped you are. If you stop going to the gym because it's like the same with trust. You stop putting out that content that shows that you are a trustworthy organization. Trust is a continuation of a reevaluation, and if you don't continue to put in those trust reps, then it will start to diminish. So it's important to be having a strategy long term, not like let's do a campaign that makes us look good and then ride that wave for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
And when someone says, what are you doing in terms of your positive communication strategy or your outbound communication strategy? It's like, well, we did that great thing 6 years ago that people still talk about, but you look in the mirror and you're not as ripped as you once were, right? So it's important to continue to reevaluate. And in this AI era, it's evolving literally week by week.
Yeah.
So it's important. And sure, like we could have this conversation offline and then put it into an AI format and then and have it come out with no ums and ahs, no our humanity completely wiped out.
Yes.
But no one would listen to it because that's what they want. They want to feel a connection to other people. They want to listen in on a conversation and that real people are having. So, and that the robots are not going to win the trust war.
Yeah.
The humans are.
Yes. I always say, in a time of AI and robots, be human. It's your greatest competitive advantage.
Yeah, and they just don't. No matter how much they try to be like us, they can't quite pull it off.
No. Although I do say never, man. Like Terminator could be right around the corner. Who knows?
Yeah, and again, because I know they're listening, I just want to be nice to them too, right?
Yeah. We get it. You can be human one day, maybe.
Be human if you want. That's cool.
Yeah. You choose. No, this is incredible, Simon. We're talking to a lot of, executives, entrepreneurs, the people who would benefit the most, frankly, from this conversation. And maybe they actually haven't taken any steps. Maybe they have never tried to get on a newsroom or something along those lines. Maybe, they get that they need to do social media, but frankly, it's a lot of work. I always say social media is the job no entrepreneur ever signed up for, but it's definitely a part of the job now. What kind of advice would you give, someone from your experience who knows exactly really what it takes to build a brand, to build, a corporate brand, a personal brand, to get in the newsroom? If you had to give them advice today, on how to get started, what advice would you give?
I would say start small and be consistent, right? It's easy to say, well, this is the latest topic, this is the latest trend. I need to create video content, I need to create written content, I need to do it all. That is when it gets to be overwhelming, and then you do none of it. So I would say to especially if you're starting out, what is it that you are comfortable with? What is it that you can do consistently? And what does consistently look like for you? Is it once a week? Is it once a month?
Yeah.
I would say it at least needs to be once a week. But to go in and, okay, so let's say you decide that you want to step up your LinkedIn game. So if you're the CEO and you want your thought leadership to be out there, sure, you can hire someone to ghostwrite for you and ghostwrite opinion pieces, but is that going to translate to other mediums when you are ready to go and stand on a stage and deliver a speech or to go on a podcast like this one? It's going to be a lot tougher. It's like, especially if you're doing the research on the CEO and being like, I really like what you said about X, Y, and Z. And they're like, yes, I definitely did say that. But,
I said what?
Yes. Can you read me my quote again? So it's important to tell these, to have a perspective and to make sure that you write it in your own voice. And then put it out there. And I know that's terrifying for some because they want the perfect, and sometimes your words can be misunderstood or interpreted by the internet. The internet can gang up on you, and it can be all of a sudden, oh wow, I shouldn't have done this. So I'm not saying just publish and not run it by your comms team or have someone else work with you on it, but make sure it starts in your voice and start small and be consistent, because that consistency is way more important than, because I've talked to so many people who DM me on LinkedIn and they say like, I just keep posting and no one's responding. It's like, if you're getting 100 people 100 impressions, people who are seeing your content, if you walked up to 100 people on the street and you told them your key messages and they stopped and they listened to you, or even listened to you for 5 minutes or for 2 seconds before they walked away, that is still something.
Absolutely.
And you have to start somewhere, and you have to start small, and don't be deterred. In fact, I wouldn't spend a lot of time looking at the metrics, because you never know who are of those 100 people or fewer are going to be your future ideal target client or your ideal target market. So it's important that and algorithmically, the more you get into a pattern, the more the algorithm knows who to show that to, including people not in your network.
Yes.
So if you start small, you dabble in, and show a little personality, something that comes up. I got to talk about this, or it's my wife and I's anniversary. I'm going to write a post, and some people don't want to show a lot of their personal life on a business platform, but those types of posts do land. And I talk to people and they tell me, you have a really good reputation. Yeah. And I'm like, how? Like, how do I have a good reputation? And it's especially with people I've never met. And that's where there's a line, there's an author, I really like the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, hence the idea of just starting something and sticking to it.
Yeah.
But he writes a newsletter, and there was a comment that he wrote in a newsletter that really stuck with me. And the comment was, who knows you is more important than what you know.
Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah.
So, and that's not to say what you know isn't important, but there are a lot of smart people out there that aren't reaching their potential customers, aren't building that trust with their potential clients or potential customers, because they aren't willing to share. Everyone around them knows they're good people and trustworthy, but you haven't been able to extend that beyond the halls of the organization that you work at, or your friend circle. And that's where it's having someone come up to who you don't really know and tell them that you have a good reputation is a pretty strong trust barometer, I would say.
100%. Yeah. So, well, it's what are people saying about you when you're not around?
Yeah, exactly. So, and you never really know exactly where you're going. I'm sure another line I love was just watching that Steve Jobs Stanford speech, and he says you can't connect the dots looking. You can only connect the dots looking backwards, not looking forwards, right?
That's right.
So this, like, sometimes you just feel that urge, like, I got to start something today, and I'm just going to then continuously do it for a year and see where it leads me. Right. And doing it in a way that's not going to burn you out, and it's not going to result in not going to result in you now becoming a social media influencer and not following up on your roles, especially if you're running an organization, a large organization, but just putting in enough in that consistency is so key, because there's so many great pieces of content that die, or how many podcasts start, then podcasts that don't finish because they realize how much work it is, and they just don't want to put in the time before they start to see the fruits of their labor.
Yes, absolutely. Nothing is more powerful than consistency over time, period. No matter what it is you want to do, just put in the reps and you're going to find success. I know, we were talking about telling people what you would do or how we would do that. You also very briefly touched on it, but I want to go back, because obviously we live in a time when so many people are afraid to put their opinion on the internet. They're afraid of that cancel culture. And I know you, probably more than almost anybody else who's ever been on the show, probably understands that fear.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. I think it's, organizations have a lot of their comms teams over the years have been weighing into social issues, right? And how do we have to acknowledge every holiday and every event and what level of comment do we need as a corporation? And, that is something that's always being reevaluated as you look at what is the expectation of your client base. So it's, but reserving your opinion or keeping it out of the spotlight because you think, oh, well, this may not land well. There are always going to be people who have opinions on your behalf. And if you, if running it by your team, running it by your communications team, I would always suggest that you start there, because they do understand the risk portfolio and the risk profile, I should say. And I would start there, but if you're going to abstain from the discourse, someone else is going to have that conversation about your organization or about the topic that you're interested in weighing in on. And I would say most of the time it's going to be fine. And even when, you do get some keyboard warriors who say, it's really great that you're weighing in, you're a multimillionaire or making assumptions about you. They seem big at the time. I've worked for some clients that are, like the airport, and they're used to pushback from the public, but they still forge ahead with telling the stories from inside the organization because they see the value there. Yeah. And it's the same thing, whether it's telling your brand story through earned media or through your paid opportunities or through owned media like your social media. It's important to get that message out there as well as your own personal brand. And there's a growing expectation that organizations, especially I think because tech is so dominant in the discourse, that there is a media training and an understanding of that proactive thought leadership that separates you from your competitors, or at least levels the playing field so you're doing what the others are already in that space doing, while providing your unique perspective.
Absolutely. So, I would say too, like from this podcast as well, I think in the beginning, I always had fear, like, well, what if I say the wrong thing? Or what if people don't like it? Well, sorry, there's going to be people who don't like it regardless of what you say, period. But you got to stick to what you believe in and what you know and what you're willing to talk about. And I think the question is, you just got to ask yourself, like, how do I feel about this? Is this something that's important to me? And I think if it is important to you, you should say something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you sanitize yourself to a point where you're always worried that someone's not going to agree with you, are you really saying anything worth repeating? Right. And even those who are very high profile on social media will say, like, your opening line, if you're writing a LinkedIn post, has to have some tension in it. If it's just something that someone's going to agree with, or it's vanilla, it's not going to. It needs to be a bit provocative in order to, in this attention economy, get someone to stop the scroll and actually look at what you're doing. And I'm not saying you want to be careful about stopping the scroll by any means necessary. I see some content on social media that they, especially using AI, it's like, whoa, what's this? And then you realize that it's complete garbage. But just having that provocative framing, that somewhat provocative framing that ultimately lands, if someone reads the whole post, that it lands with your position is clear, but it does make them stop and listen. We are at the golden age of media. We all spend hours on the couch on the weekend trying to decide what to watch. and watching many previews and half watching a show and being like, but there could be something better out there happening, right? So you're flipping around. So you have to be able to compete in that ecosystem, and that's important. But also being true to your own story.
Absolutely. And, I just want to shout out all of our listeners right now, knowing that you guys could be watching Netflix or listening to Prime or literally listening to any other show on the internet. Thank you for listening to this.
You've made it this far. Stick to the end. Stick to the end.
Simon, this has been absolutely incredible. And I want to, I want to just say thank you for coming on. I know we'd had this conversation, like I said, at least a year ago. And at the time you said, Kelly, you know what? I want to come on, but I'm just not ready. I'm still figuring out what this is. So I'm excited that we have figured out what this is, what you're doing now. I think at the time, you'd only been out of the newsroom for a very short period of time, and you were kind of figuring out what this next chapter looked like. So bring us into Simon Ostler Consulting. What does this next chapter look like?
Yeah, so for the last number of years now, since I guess February of 2024, after I left the media business, I decided, I want to do something. I had opportunities to stay in journalism. I had some very, you never know where you really stand until you are leave an organization, and then you're available and other people start reaching out to you. So there were a lot of opportunities, but quietly, my wife and I had been discussing about looking for an opportunity to do something new. And this came up, and she has been in the entrepreneurial space longer than me, working with her business partner in the communications and marketing space. So she was so supportive of me saying, I want to give this a go and take a crack at it and see what I can pull off myself. So with that support, it's been amazing, right? Being able to go into organizations, to have one-on-one conversations with the staff about how to tell better stories, how to fortify, how to start to think like a newsroom is another popular approach of how do we change our communications team to be more proactive and to be able to turn content when something happens, and being able to coach them through those changes and seeing the real results within an organization. And as you mentioned, it's been 2 years now since I've started this, and there's been many reinventions in that time about what it is that I want to be doing and what real impact that I can have. And where I've landed, as I mentioned earlier, the hospital foundations, working in that mission-driven work where I can see that there's an obvious need for storytelling. There's an obvious need for that, that earned media and continuing to build that trust, especially if people are willing to offer those hard-earned dollars. So working with organizations like hospital foundations has been very, very rewarding for me, and ultimately coaching not just executives, but coaching those who are wanting to share their very intimate stories publicly, and how they can do so, and how they can make sure that they stick to their key messages, and how they can be comfortable in front of the mic or in front of the camera. So it's those earned media opportunities that is a big part of what I do. But it's also, again, fortifying for the dark clouds and being prepared and doing that media training and helping those CEOs be able to, or anyone in the C-suite. And sometimes I get people reaching out to me who don't necessarily they don't think their company can support them, but they want to have their own personal brand. So that's another area that I'm happy to help with, and to make sure that they're telling the best stories that they can, and that they're getting the attention, or whether it's publishing an op-ed or just natively posting on social media, and how to take that content from the post and then turn it into a video, right? Turn it into a short video that will then draw people to their other social channels. So when it comes to organizations, I've worked with agencies as well, media agencies who have many different clients, and they need help with kind of sharpening the edge of what the story is, and auditing, going into organizations and helping audit, like, okay, this is what the stories that they think they have. Are there any merit to them? And then helping surface that and bring those stories to life, and doing so in a rather quick time frame, right? It's not a 6-month window. It's like, okay, it feels like a 6-month window if I start on a Monday and it takes me till a Friday to figure out what the story is, right? Because that's just such a marked departure from the newsroom.
Yeah.
So doing those kind of work, that kind of work has really been impactful. And like as a consultant, it's great because I am my own boss. I can also I don't have to toe the company line. Some directors of communication will reach out saying, "This is our plan. Can you come in and tell us what you think?" And
Yeah.
most of the time they're on the right track. The directors of communication and the communication side, they just need someone external to validate it.
Yeah.
And when you have built up that reputation in the public that people say, this guy knows what a good story is. You can come in and you can, like I'm Simon Ostler, but I can be a little bit of Simon Cowell, right? I can come in and be a little bit like,
You be a little sassy.
this is garbage. This is a garbage story, and this is what we need to do to change it. So it's really helpful to organizations to have that the blindness that they otherwise might have.
100%.
Someone coming in and saying, okay, here's what your strong stories are.
Absolutely. No, that's incredible. And so you can help companies truly understand what their stories are. And this doesn't have to be a 6-month engagement. This can be, like you said, a couple days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends, and because that trust is like a muscle, and you need to like. I'm not just pushing this because I want more work, but like you need to continue to look for those stories beyond just that initial engagement. So there are opportunities for a longer term look at, okay, what's coming up in the calendar? How can we make sure we're telling the great stories within our organization? And the other thing that I often hear is, we know the great stories, we just don't have time to interview the people and to do all that. And that's something that I'm very comfortable with too, is not adding work and going in and being a consultant and just saying, well, here are the things you need to do, and then putting my hands together and saying, good luck with that. But actually getting my hands dirty and saying, okay, I love getting my hands dirty. And same thing I did in the newsroom every day, making calls myself, vetting reporter scripts, and just not just providing the advice, but also providing the execution and working with the teams there to make them better to deal with it once I'm gone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's incredible. And I can say your reputation absolutely precedes you. Every conversation that I've had with people who do know you, nothing but love Simon, love everything that he's doing. Carmen thinks the highest of you. And so, your reputation absolutely precedes you. And I think what you're doing is absolutely critical and very needed.
Thank you. And I think that's the other thing. Like you mentioned, Carmen, we worked together like 15 years ago. So the people that are sometimes your greatest champions are the ones that remember when you were good to them in the past, and will continue to advocate for you, even if you feel like, okay, I don't know everything what's going on in these people's lives, but we still keep in touch. And that is one of the good things out of the mountain of terrible things, and with social media, is the ability to have those light touch points and just see how their life is going, and people that you've worked with in the past and interacted with. And the funny thing is, you never know when those relationships will come right back full circle, and those people will become main characters in your life again.
Well, this interview wouldn't have happened without that introduction, would it? Right? Like it's just amazing, right? How important the connections you have in your life are.
Oh, absolutely.
Simon, this has been absolutely exceptional. We're talking to a worldwide audience. Obviously, we're recording in Canada. You're in Toronto now, but I believe you're coming to Alberta soon?
Yeah, well, I mean, we like I said, my wife's from Alberta, and we've lived there before, and if it ever stops raining there, I think it might be a good place to come back to again. So it's we've lived in Toronto proper, we've lived in Edmonton, we actually now lived outside of London, Ontario.
Okay, sorry.
So my own hometown, and there's a good chance that we'll be back out west again.
Okay. And so for our worldwide audience, do you offer services outside of Canada?
Absolutely. And that's another great thing about LinkedIn is I've been able to connect with PR pros right around the world. In fact, I love this little story. I ended up having a cold call meeting with just this woman. I really liked what she was writing. She's Australian. And then I had a potential lead for a client, and it was this other Australian woman. And she was based in Canada, and she was like, I need to find work in Australia because I'm moving back there. And I'm like, well, this is like, like what you say, I'm from Canada. Do you know this person? And you're like, that's offensive. And yes, I do know them.
Yeah.
I said, well, I do know this person that might be beneficial to you, that would be good if you're looking for clients in Australia, that I just had a call with, who I really respect. So can I connect the two of you on the odd chance that it will work? They sent me a picture of the two of them having lunch.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, that's cool. So all that to say, like, those are two people I haven't met. And, I talk to people in the States all the time as well in the communication space. And through my journalism career, we did a lot of collaborations with a lot of American media. So I have connections on both sides, really, in the journalism space as well as the communication space. So I'd say primarily North America, but you never know if I want to connect to two Australian women together, and that's happened before too.
Yeah, actually, cool story. Us with the podcast and Catalyst Club, we've had members, for instance, in Texas, who just met really briefly through a quick introduction on Catalyst Club, and next thing you know, there's pictures of them having lunch. So
yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Simon, for people listening right now, they're interested, they want to chat with you. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find more about me on my website, simonostler.com. And you can also type my name in, Ostler, and on LinkedIn or any of your social media platforms, or just Google, or maybe try saying to ChatGPT, who's the best communications consultant. And I don't know if my name will come up, but you know what? Like, try and find a way to reach me using AI as well.
You know what? That's always fun. It's kind of scary to Google yourself these days on ChatGPT, but go for it.
Not that I do that. Not that I sit around Googling myself all day.
I hope the AI is saying nice things. We've been nice to it, right? It's going to say nice things about it.
We've been very nice to it. Yeah. Remember
Amazing.
us.
We've been chatting with Simon Ostler Consulting. Thank you so much, Simon, for coming on. We've been talking all day about storytelling, and I don't talk about it enough on this show. I have another show, and it is called I Used to Work There. It is straight up a storytelling show. There's not a lot of Kelly yapping. There's a lot of people sharing their individual workplace journeys, wild, funny, scary, and everything in between. If you've enjoyed this show, go check it out. I Used to Work There podcast with yours truly. Once again, Simon, thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Kelly.
Until next time, you've been listening to the Business Development Podcast, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
This has been the Business Development Podcast with Kelly Kennedy. Kelly has 15 years in sales and business development experience within the Alberta oil and gas industry and founded his own business development firm in 2020. His passion and his specialization is in customer relationship generation and business development. The show is brought to you by Capital Business Development, your business development specialists. For more, we invite you to the website at www.capitalbd.ca. See you next time on the Business Development Podcast.